woman suffers when she is waiting at home under such circumstances. If you don't believe me, as I know you don't, here's Miggs, who is only too often a witness of it. Ask her.' 'Oh, she was very bad the other night, sir, indeed she were,' said Miggs. 'If you hadn't the sweetness of an angel in you, mim, I don't think you could bear it, I really don't.' 'Miggs,' said Mrs Varden, 'you're profane.' 'Begging your pardon, mim,' returned Miggs with shrill rapidity, 'such was not my intentions, and such I hope is not my character, though I am but a servant.' 'Answering me, Miggs, and providing yourself,' retorted her mistress, looking round with dignity, 'is one and the same thing. How dare you speak of angels in connection with your sinful fellow beings? Mere,' said Mrs Varden, glancing at herself in a neighbouring mirror, and arranging the ribbon of her cap in a more becoming fashion, 'mere worms and grovellers, as we are.' 'I did not intend, mim, if you please, to give offence,' said Miggs, confident in the strength of her compliment, and developing strongly in the throat as usual, 'and I did not expect it would be took as such. I hope I know my own unworthiness, and that I hate and despise myself and all my fellow creatures as every practicable Christian should.' 'You'll have the goodness, if you please,' said Mrs Varden loftily, 'to step upstairs and see if Dolly has finished dressing, and to tell her that the chair that was ordered for her will be here in a minute, and that if she keeps it waiting I shall send it away that instant. I'm sorry to see that you don't take your tea, Varden, and that you don't take yours, Mr Joseph, though of course it would be foolish of me to expect that anything that can be had at home and in the company of females would please you.' This pronoun was understood in the plural sense, and included both gentlemen, upon both of whom it was rather hard and undeserved, for Gabriel had applied himself to the meal with a very promising appetite, until it was spoilt by Mrs Varden herself, and Joe had as great a liking for the female society of the locksmith's house, or for a part of it at all events, as man could well entertain. But he had no opportunity to say anything in his own defence, for at that moment Dolly herself appeared, and struck him quite dumb with her beauty. Never had Dolly looked so handsome as she did then, in all the glow and grace of youth, with all her charms increased 100-fold by a most becoming dress, by 1,000 little coquettish ways which nobody could assume with a better grace, and all the sparkling expectation of that accursed party. It is impossible to tell how Joe hated that party, whatever it was, and all the other people who were going to it, whoever they were. And she hardly looked at him. No, hardly looked at him. And when the chair was seen through the open door coming blundering into the workshop, she actually clapped her hands and seemed glad to go. But Joe gave her his arm, there was some comfort in that, and handed her into it. To see her seat herself inside, with her laughing eyes brighter than diamonds, and her hand surely she had the prettiest hand in the world on the ledge of the open window, and her little finger provokingly and pertly tilted up, as if it wondered why Joe didn't squeeze or kiss it. To think how well one or two of the modest snowdrops would have become that delicate bodice, and how they were lying neglected outside the parlour window. To see how Miggs looked on with a face expressive of knowing how all this loveliness was got up, and of being in the secret of every string and pin and hook and eye, and of saying it ain't half as real as you think, and I could look quite as well myself if I took the pains. To hear that provoking precious little scream when the chair was hoisted on its poles, and to catch that transient but not to be forgotten vision of the happy face within, what torments and aggravations, and yet what delights were these! The very chairmen seemed favoured rivals as they bore her down the street. There never was such an alteration in a small room in a small time as in that parlour when they went back to finish tea. So dark, so deserted, so perfectly disenchanted. It seemed such sheer nonsense to be sitting tamely there, when she was at a dance with more lovers than man could calculate fluttering about her, with the whole party doting on and adoring her and wanting to marry her. Miggs was hovering about too, and the fact of her existence, the mere circumstance of her ever having been born, appeared, after Dolly, such an unaccountable practical joke. It was impossible to talk. It couldn't be done. He had nothing left for it but to stir his tea round and round and round, and ruminate on all the fascinations of the locksmith's lovely daughter. Gabriel was dull too. It was a part of the certain uncertainty of Mrs Varden's temper that when they were in this condition she should be gay and sprightly. "I need have a cheerful disposition, I am sure," said the smiling housewife, "to preserve any spirits at all, and how I do it I can scarcely tell." "Ah, mim," sighed Miggs, "begging your pardon for the interruption, there an't a many like you." "Take away, Miggs," said Mrs Varden, rising. "Take away, pray. I know I'm a restraint here, and as I wish everybody to enjoy themselves as they best can, I feel I had better go." "No, no, Martha," cried the locksmith. "Stop here. I'm sure we shall be very sorry to lose you, eh, Joe?" Joe started and said, "Certainly." "Thank you, Varden, my dear," returned his wife, "but I know your wishes better. Tobacco and beer or spirits have much greater attractions than any I can boast of, and therefore I shall go and sit upstairs and look out of window, my love. Good night, Mr Joseph. I am very glad to have seen you, and I only wish I could have provided something more suitable to your taste. Remember me very kindly, if you please, to old Mr Willet, and tell him that whenever he comes here I have a crow to pluck with him. Good night." Having uttered these words with great sweetness of manner, the good lady dropped a curtsey remarkable for its condescension, and serenely withdrew. And it was for this Joe had looked forward to the 25th of March for weeks and weeks, and had gathered the flowers with so much care, and had cocked his hat, and made himself so smart. This was the end of all his bold determination, resolved upon for the 100th time to speak out to Dolly and tell her how he loved her. To see her for a minute, for but a minute, to find her going out to a party, and glad to go, to be looked upon as a common pipe smoker, beer bibber, spirit guzzler, and tosspot. He bade farewell to his friend the locksmith, and hastened to take horse at the Black Lion, thinking as he turned towards home, as many another Joe has thought before and since, that here was an end to all his hopes, that the thing was impossible and never could be, that she didn't care for him, that he was wretched for life, and that the only congenial prospect left him was to go for a soldier or a sailor, and get some obliging enemy to knock his brains out as soon as possible. End of chapter 13.